This week, President Biden held a global conference on democracy, stating to leaders around the globe that the United States is, quote, demonstrating the resilience of American democracy, end quote. Now, I hate to say it, but I can't say that I'm seeing much proof of that resilient democracy these days. I tend to agree more with something that Judge Michael Luttig said last week. Quote, the institutions of our democracy and law are under vicious, unsustainable, and unendurable attack from within. American democracy and the rule of law are in peril. The pillars of our democracy and the rule of law are faltering from these attacks as we speak today. With the former president's and his Republican Party's determined denial of January 6th, their refusal to acknowledge that the former president lost the 2020 presidential election fair and square, and their promise that the 2024 election will not be, quote, stolen from them again, as they maintain it was in 2020. America's democracy and the rule of law are in constitutional peril still, and there is no end to the threat in sight, end quote. That was Judge Michael Luttig, former federal judge on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit. Judge Luttig has long been regarded as a leading conservative legal mind, but you might know him for his role in helping to preserve our democracy on January 6, 2021. Judge Luttig gave that speech that I just quoted from at the University of Georgia School of Law on March 22nd. And as a result of that speech, we made a plan to have Judge Luttig on the show today, having nothing to do with the Manhattan grand jury indictment of former President Trump. Like many Americans, Judge Luttig's concern for American democracy is rooted in the events around January 6th. We now know that in the days before the insurrection, then President Trump tried to convince then Vice President Pence to use his power in the Senate to overturn the results of the election. Pence's personal lawyer called Judge Luttig for help. Luttig quickly wrote up his opinion that the vice president had no power to change the outcome, and he posted it on Twitter. And on January 6, Pence's staff incorporated Mr. Luttig's reasoning, citing him by name, into a letter announcing that Pence would not try to block the counting of the electoral vote. Now, as we watch the GOP abandon pretense of operating under the rule of law, of operating with democratic values, this conversation feels more prescient than ever. Joining me now is Judge Michael Luttig, the former federal judge on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the 4th District. Judge Luttig, good morning. Good to see you. Thank you for joining us this morning. And I want to talk about that speech because that was the reason we booked you. During the speech you gave at the University of Georgia School of Law, you were addressing mostly law students, and you said, quote, indeed, it might not be much overstatement, if any, to say that during your lifetime, this great nation of laws in which we are privileged to live will effectively decide whether it will live by the rule of law or whether it will live by the rule of politics. So all-consuming has become the politicization of our country, our institutions of democracy, and now even our institutions of law. Tell me more about that, sir.
Ali, thank you for having me on with you today. The perils for American democracy and the rule of law actually crested with Thursday's indictment in Manhattan and the Republican Party's continued denial of January 6th and its refusal to acknowledge the former president lost the 2020 election. There's now no end in sight to these perils. In the months ahead, America's democracy and rule of law will be severely tested, and hopefully not beyond the breaking point. If the former president was to be indicted in any of the pending criminal investigation into his offenses against the United States, it should have been first for his offenses in attempting to overturn the 2020 election. What will now be the prosecution in Manhattan is the very last prosecution the country would have wanted to be the first prosecution of a president of the United States, and the first prosecution of this president in particular. Frankly, it ill serves the nation for this indictment to be the first indictment of a president in our history. The trial in Manhattan promises to be a spectacle unbecoming of the United States and immensely damaging to the United States of America. As Peggy Noonan put it in the Wall Street Journal this past week, while this indictment and prosecution is perhaps not beneath the former president, it is beneath us as Americans. On the other hand, the effort to overturn the 2020 election and the attack on the United States Capitol were unprecedented and grave offenses against not only America's democracy, but also the rule of law. It's the investigation into these grave offenses where there is urgency, not into the matter of the president and Stormy Daniels. Unfortunately, I'm afraid that this indictment out of Manhattan is the high cost to the nation of the inevitably protracted, but nonetheless protracted investigation by the Department of Justice into the events of January 6th. I guess what the Manhattan indictment will do, though, is ratchet up exponentially the pressure on Jack Smith and the Department of Justice, as well as the district attorney in Fulton County, Georgia, to seek indictments as quickly as possible if they are going to. And if those indictments are forthcoming soon, they will eclipse the indictment in Manhattan and refocus the country on the former president's conduct that should be the focus, his effort to overturn the 2020 election.
Well, both of those, or the other cases of which you speak, two federal cases, the Georgia indictment, even the documents case, all of them do perhaps have greater degrees of complexity than the one facing the Manhattan jury. Back in January in the Washington Post, you published an in-depth, well, the Washington Post published an in-depth profile on you and quoted you saying that Donald Trump's role in the insurrection is arguably the worst crime against the United States that a president could commit. And you asserted at the time in that article that there was ample evidence against him and that just may be the beginning of the end of Donald Trump. Do you hold the same opinion, given the unwavering support within the Republican Party for Donald Trump right now, even amongst his opponents, his potential opponents, or those like Mike Pence who think that he did his family a great deal of harm?
Ali, I hold the same opinion, all the more because of the Republicans' circling of the wagons to protect the former president. And as I mentioned at the top of this segment, they're now unified and continuing insistence that the former president won the 2020 presidential election, and that the January 6th was nothing to be concerned about. But let me also say for your viewers, Ali, that the investigations, both by the Department of Justice and in Fulton County by District Attorney Fani Willis, they are large, even massive investigations.
Right.
But as such, the indictments and prosecutions there, if there are to be those, actually would not be as complicated as a matter of law as this indictment in Manhattan promises and appears to be.
I just want to ask you, because we've got some comments from Michael Pence right now, and he has mentioned, among other things, when he was asked about January 6th, he said that Donald Trump was, I'm paraphrasing here, was fed incorrect information from his advisors that day, but that Pence was always confident in what his duty was in terms of certifying the vote. Now, no one was closer to this situation than you, because it was Mike Pence's lawyer who contacted you to say, can you give us some cover in terms of your legal scholarship? Do you believe that to be true, that Pence was always confident that he was not in a position to do what Donald Trump wanted in overturning the election in Congress?
I don't have any insight into the conversations and machinations within the White House, but I have no question at all that the former vice president always believed from the outset that he had no authority to unilaterally overturned the election on January 6th, Allie.
Thank you for that, sir. We appreciate your time, as always, and your wisdom. Judge Michael Luttig is a former federal judge on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit.